Let's talk about skill feats. Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spirit Bell Games here. Skill feats in Pathfinder 2nd Edition are a contentious topic. It's not the existence of skill feats that's under debate, but their design and distribution. Specifically, there are three major complaints that people tend to have. First, there are too many skill feats to look through. Second, the skill feats are unbalanced amongst each other, ranging from very useful to very useless. And third, the skill feats are unbalanced between skills, leading to some skills getting overcharged skill feats while others getting very underpowered ones. Now, I often make videos where I end up defending the design decisions that Pathfinder 2nd Edition has made because I see the value in them. With skill feats, it gets challenging, and you'll see why. Let's start with the first point itself. There are too many skill feats. I think that this is generally valid when it comes to the new player experience with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Because for a new player who has picked 5 to 7 skill feats, the new player that has picked training in 5 to 7 skills at level 1 itself, then has to read between 5 to 7 skill feats for each of those skills. A lot of this is because Pathfinder 2nd Edition chooses to organize its skill feats mostly organically, so that all of the skill feats for a particular skill that require you to be trained in that skill tend to be available at first level itself. For expert requirements, it tends to be at second level. For the requirement of master proficiency, they tend to be available at 7th level. And if it requires legendary proficiency, they tend to be available at 15th level. But also, they are bottom heavy. There are more skill feats that you can gain just by being trained than by being legendary. And because of this organic distribution, we end up having to look at 30, 35, 40 maybe skill feats when we are starting out. This is a problem. But I'm going to say that this is a new player specific problem. And so we can think about it as growing pains with the system, because after you've created your first couple of characters, this stops being an issue because the skills are the same across all characters. So it's not like learning a new class feature each time a new class is released if you want to play it. The skills, the skill feats are shared and available across different characters. There is a potential solution here where we spread out the different skill feats over different levels, multiple levels, more so than they are spread out right now, much like how class feats, much like how class feats are spread out more evenly rather than just based off of trained, expert, and master and legendary proficiencies. The downside of that is that for experienced players, you will start seeing similarly built characters picking the same skill feats again and again. Now, some might argue that because of the next two complaints, a lot of people do end up picking the same skill feats, but for now at least, the option is available that for two characters in the party that are both specializing in diplomacy, that they may both end up picking different skill feats within the set of diplomacy skill feats. So yes, this is an issue, especially with new players, especially with onboarding. In all other cases, including general feats and class feats, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is good that it doesn't overwhelm you with options, but with skill feats, for the new player, it does overwhelm you with options. And it takes a couple of different characters before you can get comfortable making those decisions. So the best solution for this is just GM guidance. That the GM should guide a new player towards skill feats that they know to be more useful. And if the GM and the players are both new, then unfortunately, the only option is to turn to advice online And thankfully, there is plenty of advice online to help guide you. Still, if I could redesign it, I would spread out the skill feats more evenly over the levels, just like class feats have been spread out. All right, so this takes us to the second complaint, which is that within the same skill feats are not balanced with each other, that some are quite useful, whereas others are very much not so. And I think a lot of this discussion boils down to whether you think out of combat skill feats are useful or not useful. And for the most part, I'm going to sidestep this discussion entirely. I'm going to agree with those who say that combat skill feats are the most useful. And in a future video, hopefully the next one, I will discuss the issue, let's call it, with non-combat skill feats. So within this complaint, that for the same skill, some skill feats are more powerful than others because they have more combat applicability, how do we think through the design justification for this? Well, for one thing, as I talked about in my action economy video, not every class has the action budget to use skill actions in combat. And this is not bad design, this is variability in class design. Some classes can be designed with less power, less raw power like damage, and more action flexibility, whereas other classes are designed with more raw power and less action flexibility. In the classes that have more raw power and less action flexibility, such as the Magus, a melee Magus usually comes to mind, there isn't enough action budget there to really slot in a whole lot of skill feats. And so, with the exception of one or two, it behooves a Magus to then take either niche skill actions or just go beyond the combat skill actions and just pick skill feats that are useful out of combat. That to me is the justification of why we have non-combat, less useful for now, let's call them skill feats, and combat, which is the powerful skill feats. Is it a good justification? Well, it kind of depends on how useful those feats are outside of combat. And again, that is a discussion that I'll be having in a future, hopefully the next video. And this brings us to the last, final, and maybe the most egregious complaint, or well, the most egregious part of design, which leads to a lot of complaints, which is that the power of skill feats is not equally distributed across skills. Some, like intimidation and medicine, appear to be very powerful. You have battle medicine in the medicine skill tree. And others, like society, seem to have almost nothing, maybe multilingual, and that's it. So how do we see here a justification for this disparity? Before making this video, I had a hypothesis. I thought I knew how I could justify this disparity, and I thought that the online discourse was missing the forest for the trees. But then when I sat down with the hypothesis and analyzed all of the different skills, I realized that even with my hypothesis, which does make the disparity seem less, but even with my hypothesis, the disparity still exists. And at the end of the day, I think in this case, the online discourse is correct. But let me first present to you my justification and hopefully get you to think about skill feats just slightly differently. Here's my hypothesis, is that the design of skill feats considers in its balance also the skill actions that are available to you from a skill, regardless of whether or not you have the skill feat. What do I mean by this? I mean that battle medicine seems very powerful because the non-skill feat options with medicine, the in-combat ones, we administer first aid, they don't seem that strong. And so what happens is that the powerful skill action of medicine is gated behind a skill feat, which is battle medicine. Whereas something like deception, which doesn't have any good skill feat for combat usage really, that can be better understood if you look at skill actions that you get from being trained in deception. Create a diversion and feint, two ways of making enemies temporarily off guard, and with feint especially, to be able to do it in a repeatable way, unlike demoralize, which once you've done it, the enemy is immune. Well, the enemy is immune to your demoralize attempts. And so this was my hypothesis, that if I just think about skill feats more holistically while considering skill actions as well, then the disparity across different skills should lessen and become nothing. What I found out is that it does lessen, but it doesn't become nothing. And here I'm going to very quickly go over each of the skills to see where they land. And yes, I guess this is a sort of tier list video because I will be giving each skill a numerical rating for how useful it is, mostly looking at combat. And then at the end, we'll just look at the difference in the numerical rating that the different skills get. All right, it's just going to be a simple scale from 0 to 3. So 0, 1, 2, or 3, depending on how useful it is in combat. All right, let's start with acrobatics. Acrobatics is a tough one because it has a bunch of different skill actions that are quite niche. The combination of skill feats like catfall with maneuver in flight and squeeze generally give it a rating of 1, I would say, but it's single-handedly the 7th level feat kip up that is increasing the rating from 1 to 2 in this case. Kip up is very good. It comes in a little bit later than other useful skill actions, but again, it is so good that it makes me give acrobatics a rating of 2. Next, Arcana. And with Arcana, we see the issue with a lot of these knowledge-based skill feats, where it is good for recall knowledge, and it is good for identification of combat spells, and it is good for tricking magic items. But all 3 cases depend upon the type of enemies you have and the type of magic that is happening. So there are 3 good use cases, but they may end up being niche or not applicable to the skill that you have chosen for your campaign. So even though all 3 are good, with recall knowledge and trick magic item especially being quite broadly useful, again, if the enemies are right and the spells are right, because they still depend on the types of enemies and the types of magic, I can't give it a 3. I have to give it a 2. I would only give it a 3 if you were in the type of campaign which especially dealt with that type of, in this case, arcane magic or arcane enemies. So Arcana gets a 2, but it is a reluctant 2. I almost want to give it a 1 because, again, the power seems split between Arcana, nature, occultism, and religion. But just because it's not only recall knowledge, it also helps with trick magic item, and if you can get the right ritual spell cast using Arcana, that may help you out in combat as well. So because of that, Arcana gets a reluctant 2 from me. Then we get to athletics, easy 3. We know that a lot of builds can be made around athletics and that it is generally useful. Unless you're running a whole campaign where all of the enemies have will as their weakest saving throw, you can use athletic maneuvers to make enemies prone, tripped, shove. Athletics gets a solid 3. Crafting, 0. We'll come back to crafting. But immediately I can see that for within combat, there are no skill actions to be used. 0 for now. Okay, next we have deception. as I talked previously, that if we just look at the skill feats, we won't find much of interest here. But if we look at the skill actions themselves, Feint and Create a Diversion are sort of evergreen. Like, Feint is repeatable multiple times within the same combat, and Create a Diversion works on a large chunk of the monsters. We have something in here for both ranged characters, Create a Diversion, and melee characters, which is to Feint. And when you combine that with a couple of small supporting skill feats like laying the diversion and fleeing diversion, that's enough for me to give it a solid 2, almost a 2.5 even, but can't give it a 3 because then it would have to compete with athletics, and that seems maybe too strong. So a 2.5 for deception. Next we have diplomacy. Diplomacy gets a 1. It has Bon mot, and technically it also has no cause for alarm, but really it has Bon mot. And Bon mot, because it has the linguistic trait, has more narrow applicability, although when applicable, it can be quite handy. We will come back to diplomacy as well, because diplomacy is one of those skills that even in combat-heavy games, you do still end up rolling for it outside of combat in ways that are quite useful. Okay, but for now, diplomacy gets a 1. Intimidation. This is the one that people rave about, and I don't get the hype. Demoralize is a good action, yes. Demoralize with intimidating glare support is a great action, great third action if you have the action to spare. But then the additional skill feat support, I mean, yes, they're all technically applicable in combat. Are they really that good? Like, Battle Cry is the one that everyone gets hyped up about, but unless you're playing in Abomination Vaults, how many times do you even start within 30 feet of the enemies? In the kind of maps that I have both run and played in, it is not common to start within 30 feet of another enemy. Whereas stuff like Terrifying Resistance and Terrifying, Flight, the one that makes the enemies flee, Terrified Retreat, I think, they seem even more niche than Battle Cry. And I know players who've taken those skill feats where I just haven't seen it come up. Once, maybe, there was a PL-3 creature that ran on being terrified, but outside of that, I don't remember there being a lot of Terrified Retreat happening. In the case of Intimidation, don't get me wrong, it's good, and I'm still going to give it a 3 because Demoralize is a good generically useful action. But the skill feat support, I feel, is overvalued. Speaking of, then we get to medicine. All right, battle medicine. Again, easy 3. You have a lot of builds that can work off of just playing around with battle medicine. You can specialize in battle medicine. It will save lives. You can have whole teams that just rely on battle medicine as their only form of in-combat healing outside of items. But again, when it comes to skill feat support, I think people overvalue the kind of skill feats that it brings. Though this is campaign dependent. If you're in a type of campaign where it really matters, every 10-minute really matters, then yes, continual recovery and ward medic are both excellent, and probably even risky surgery are all very good skill feats to have. But in a lot of the campaigns, time is not that tight. But okay, I do have to give it that there is some campaign dependent stuff going on over here. And yes, we are talking out of combat stuff. Yes, because treat wounds, anything that only affects treat wounds and not battle medicine, that's out of combat by definition. So clearly it seems that we do need to add some out of combat component to our rating. For now, let's just continue. Nature, gets the same 2 as Arcana. Nothing really stands out outside of recall knowledge, recognize spell, trick magic item. Occultism, better than Arcana because in addition to the three basic things that it can do, the recall knowledge, trick magic item, and recognize spell, it also has disturbing knowledge as a skill feat and root magic, both of which can be used in combat. So this gets, well, is it a 3 or a 2? It's more of a solid 2, a 2.5, kind of like Deception. Occultism, yeah, let's give it a 2.5 in this case. And then we get to Performance. All right, here's the thing. I kind of forgot about Performance. I did not realize how bad the skill and skill feats were. Fascinating Performance is a nothing burger because Fascinated in itself as a condition is, I don't know why they designed it like that. I don't get whether this is supposed to be an out of combat condition exclusively, or if it's supposed to be a in combat condition that was supposed to be useful at one point, but then during the design feedback it got nerfed so hard that at this point it's better if it just does not exist because it's a lot of bookkeeping for basically very little outcome. Okay. Fascinating Performance would on its own give this skill a 0 for Performance. Thankfully, we have Distracting Performance that's sliding in with just enough power there. It's niche, but it's there, and it's teamwork based. So Distracting Performance lets me give Performance a reluctant 1. All right, and then we get to Religion. Kind of like with Arcana, it would be a reluctant 2, but it has Pilgrim's Token, and then it has some legacy, like pre-remaster feats that are Sacred Defense and Battle Prayer. And all of that combined, yeah, I think it gets a 2.5. I think it's in the same range as Occultism. Why not? Society. What are we going to do about Society? Is it going to be a 0? Oh, is multilingual enough to save this from being a 0? For multilingual alone to keep Society from not being 0, it has to support a whole bunch of linguistic feats, like powerful abilities that have the linguistic trait, either whether it's spells or feats or what have you. We have Bon Mot, we have a few spells, suggestion, subconscious suggestion, yeah. Technically, Society can be used to recall knowledge on NPCs. This is turning out to be another half-hearted one, but there are enough different moving pieces here that, yeah, we'll give it a 1. Stealth. All right. Well, I gave Deception a 2 for supporting making enemies flat-footed. What is this? 2020. For making enemies off guard, and Stealth can do the same while improving your own defense. So yeah, it gets a 2. Not the happiest 2, but still a 2. Survival, 0. We'll come back to it. Thievery. The only thing really that's saving Thievery is the new remaster skill action, which is the, what is it called? Tamper? Oh, right, Dirty Trick. It's called Dirty Trick. You can make an enemy clumsy. That, I think, gives it a 1. Technically, you can be disarming traps and complex hazards within combat, so, you know, maybe it's not a reluctant 1. Maybe it's an enthusiastic 1. A 1.5, if you will. But it's not more than that. Okay, so already we are seeing a pretty big spread from 0 to 3. And this is when I said that we should include skill actions within our consideration when also talking about skill feats. So what am I missing here? All right, maybe we need a second hypothesis. Maybe we zoom out a little bit more, and instead of just looking at skill actions and skill feats that are just useful in combat, let's talk about ways that skills can be foundational for particular campaigns. In particular, I want to revisit crafting, diplomacy, and survival. Okay, starting with crafting. If you are in a campaign that goes from levels 10 to 20, and you have access to workshops, but you don't have access to high-level magic item shops, crafting becomes your key way to even access the kind of magic items that you would want instead of just relying on the items that you get from the story. So in that particular type of campaign, crafting goes from an unimportant feat, an unimportant skill, to a very important skill. Survival, I think, plays the same role in a game that is built around hexploration. I'm making games built around hexplorations, and a lot of the hexploration activities rely on survival. If you have wilderness exploration in particular, survival is going to be key for foraging, for tracking, for covering tracks, all of these activities. And then we have diplomacy. Diplomacy, I gave it a 1, but as I said, that even in campaigns that are more combat focused, diplomacy does keep coming up again and again. And then you have campaigns which aren't just combat focused, and in those ones where there's a lot of the social blah blah, as Matt Colville would say, diplomacy suddenly shoots up in prominence. And you know what? While we are doing that, let's go back to thievery, because if we are doing a dungeon crawl with lots of different mechanical traps, thievery is what's going to save you. It's going to keep those traps from going off that alert dangerous groups of enemies. It's going to keep those traps, those hazards from going off that separate the party and make them easier to kill. So these 4 skills, crafting, diplomacy, survival, and thievery, I can see them being very prominent in specific campaigns. And I don't even think that these types of campaigns are too niche. This is why I'm not giving performance the same benefit of doubt, because I think a campaign where performance is a keystone skill is very rare. All right, so what happens if we give these skills the weights that they deserve? Then we see that, with the exception of performance, everything else ranges between like a 2 and a 3. Hey there, I wanted to make a couple of addendums from the editing booth. During the original recording, I kept forgetting that society was also given a score of 1, and now, when I have considered all of the ways that other skills like diplomacy are useful in specific campaigns, I think I should feel comfortable giving society a conditional 2, because even though you may not run into occultism exclusive adventures, it's very hard to play scenarios where you're not engaging with any settlement at all. And if you're at a settlement, whether it's a city or a village, society is helpful. So society gets a conditional 2. The other thing is, I said that Arcana and Nature were a reluctant 2, but when I think about the spell list, I mean, when are people picking Trick Magic item? They're most likely picking it to get the Tailwind spell, 2nd rank, and that is in the Arcana and Nature spell lists, right? Arcane and Primal Traditions. So perhaps that is why religion and occultism have additional skills to round them out, because Trick Magic item alone may not be a selling point for them where it is for both Arcana and Nature. So it turned out that my one hypothesis was not enough to reduce the disparity, but with the addition of the second hypothesis, we see a lot less disparity altogether. Between skill actions, skill feats, and the importance of skills in specific campaigns, we see that most skills, except for performance, seem to have some usage under different conditions. This is, by the way, a lot of justification, design justification for the way skill feats are distributed, and they could have made it easier on themselves by, well, okay, I have to think about this. I was going to say they could have made it easier on themselves by moving all skill actions to skill feats, but that doesn't make sense, does it? Okay, so they made some decisions on what they thought were things that were core versus things that they could reasonably gate behind a feat because narratively it made sense to specialize, like demoralize on its own being core, but battle medicine being gated behind a skill feat. But when you combine those things together and then also look at campaign specific skill usage, then everything starts to make sense, except again for performance. I don't know why. Why is performance the black sheep here? Maybe I'm just not running the types of campaigns that a lot of other people are running, where performance is actually a big deal. But I wish that there was proper skill feat for performance. And as someone who doesn't just make videos, someone who also homebrews a lot, if it doesn't exist, then I just create it on my own. For performance, crafting, and survival, I have homebrew skill feats that introduce combat-specific skill actions. For performance, it is a taunt, not the Guardian's taunt, but a less powerful version of taunt that requires making a performance skill check. For survival, I have a sort of first aid skill that helps reduce persistent damage. And then I was happy to see that in Shining Kingdoms, they put out Stifle Flames, which is a similar usage of survival. So that was validating, although I don't get why they gave it the uncommon tag. Probably because it's a regional skill feat. I just think that a first aid skill should be common for anyone who has survival training. And for crafting, I have a couple of different usages that can apply to combat, including one where you quickly mix alcohol together, call it liquid courage, expend some gold, and pass it to your ally to reduce their frightened condition once. Okay, this video has gone on long enough, but if you want the extended deep dive into all of those different homebrewed skill actions and additional skill feats that I have introduced to support those skill actions, you can watch the free extended version of this video on Patreon. You don't have to pay anything. You can just watch it for free there. Anyway, this was a lot of me talking about skill feats that are important in combat or just foundational to a type of campaign. But I also want to talk about how skill feats can feed into non-combat procedures. And for that, I will have to talk about subsystems, which is likely going to be the next video. Hey, coming at you once again from the editing booth to let you know that the next video, which talks about subsystems and how skill feats can be tied into subsystems, but they don't by default, that video is up on Patreon. You can get early access to that with paid membership, or you can just wait a week and get access to it on YouTube and Patreon for free. Every Patreon supporter makes it more likely that these videos continue. And I would like to give a special shout out to the two most recent supporters, Chris and Jake. Thank you for making these videos happen. For now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.